Hello, everybody. My name is Professor Rich, and we're here to learn English. Starting a new course can be exciting, but also a little bit scary. Will the teacher be any good? Will this course contain the things that you really need to improve your English? Will the other people in the class be from different countries or the same country as you? Will they always speak English in class? Will they speak with a good accent and good pronunciation? So today I'm going to share top tips on how to make the most of an English learning course. You'll learn how to set goals, what materials you should bring to the class, and what techniques you can use in order to really excel at English learning in line with an English course. I know that many of the people who come onto this channel actually spend most of their time learning themselves. And I think that's a great way to learn a language. I think actually it's really important that you spend a good deal of time studying, practicing on your own. I mean, really, there's no way to learn a language without pushing yourself forward in your own time. However, let's not make the mistake of saying that teachers and courses are not necessary. For most people, they are, and for all students, I think they are at least beneficial. So let's start by considering a list of things that we might think about an English learning course. And I want you guys to tell me if these things are positive or negative. So here's our start for today. Look at the list of 12 phrases that I have on the board there. And I want you to tell me, are they positive or negative? So which of these things here are positive and which of them are negative? Let me just take a moment to say hello to everybody in the chat. Hello to Sleepwalker. Hello to Julia Hata. Hello to Pachu. Hello to Enrique Gonzalez. In Mexico they say Gonzalez. And in Spain, which is where I learned my Spanish, we say González. So everyone who's joining us live and also anyone who is watching this video later, consider which of these things here are positive and which are negative. If you're joining us live, you can mention them in the chat and say actually which of them are positive and which are negative. And if you're not joining us live, then you pick up your notepad, and we'll be talking about notepads today. Pick up your notepad, make a little note with a pen. I do encourage people to use a pen and notepad when studying. I am a technophile. Phile means I like, and techno is technology. Technophile means I like technology. However, when it comes to study and notes, there is no substitute for paper and pen. It's the best. The best. So pick up your notepad, pick up a pen, and make a note of all of the activities that we look at today in today's English learning lecture. And if you are new to the channel, now would be a great time to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and join the best damn place on the internet to learn English. So we have some answers coming in. Sleepwalker mentioned that 1, 2, 7, 10, 11, and 12 are negative. Yeah, that looks great to me. Is that what everybody's got? Got answers from Pachu. And Julia's gone the other way, vice versa. Positive. We have 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. Well done, everybody. That seems great. Hello to Derek. Hi, Derek. Xin chào. Xin chào. Oh, right. Let's take a look what I have here then. So negatives. The first thing we're going to think about here is what goes wrong in English courses. I'm going to talk a bit about this. I'd like you to listen in the chat, and I will ask you some questions about this in a moment. So you can treat this like listening practice. I will be lecturing, and I want you to pay attention, make notes, and prepare to answer questions. What goes wrong in English courses? So, too many students. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory, although what I will say about too many students is that opinions do vary quite a lot. I have my own opinion, and to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not 100% sure that my opinion is the correct one. I think it's just an opinion. So I'm going to tell you actually what, from my personal perspective, too many students means. And probably a lot of you will disagree, because I think my opinion is on the high end. Personally, I think too many students for most English courses would mean 16 or more. I actually think that the ideal number of students is 12. I think 12 is a really good number of students. I think 16 and more gets to too many. And I think 20 and more is when we have kind of a problem, because there's really not enough teacher attention per student. And we do need some teacher attention per student. I think 20 or more, you can do something with it, especially if you have some very high-level students who can assist with peer correction, or you have a teaching assistant, or you're teaching kids and doing project-based work or some other kind of specialist class. However, on the whole, I think that's too much. So ideally 12, that's the ideal number. That means if I have less than 12 students, I would actually want to increase that number. And 12 is perfect. One of the things about 12 students is there are many dynamics you can have with 12 students. You can have team of six, competing in a game or having a debate. You can have 3 4s, so 3 groups of 4 working in project work. You can have 4 3s. So again, 4 groups of 3 students in groups of 3, 4 different groups. That's perfect for project work. And you can also have 6 2s. So you can have 6 pairs, and you can mix those up in many different ways. So 12 is just perfect number. I think that's the best number. And I think we can go all the way up to about 16, maybe 17, maybe 18, and still have quite effective teaching. That's my opinion. But as I said, people vary really on what they think about this. Many students I talk to tell me that they want 6 or less. So students in general really think that classes should be smaller. And I think that's because students often want individual attention from the teacher, which is understandable. It's understandable from a student perspective. And we could have a greater discussion about how these different numbers in classes vary and in what situation different numbers are better. But I'm going to leave it at that. Too many students can be a problem. And obviously, it just relates to economics, right? The more students you have, the more money is coming in. And of course, money makes the world go round. But I would argue that too little students is also a problem. A group of 2 or 3 or 4 in some circumstances can be very difficult to teach, especially if it's 4 very shy students, for example. That can be a very difficult class. And in that situation, it might actually be beneficial to have more students. All right, let's move on to the next issue that goes wrong in English courses. We've got incorrect level. So this happens all the time. It is not an easy problem to solve, and sometimes it's very difficult to practically solve this. Have you ever been in this situation where you feel that your level has not been correct for the class? So with incorrect level, we have two main issues that can happen. One is that the level of the class is too easy, and the other is that the level of the class is too difficult. And both of those situations happen. Now, I've been teaching English for 16 years, and this still happens to me. So it's not a super easy problem to solve. And it is also something that relates a little bit to too many students, because the more students you have, the more difficult it is for the teacher to notice when there's an incorrect level. Even though we do diagnostic tests in order to ensure that the level is correct, often it takes some one-to-one time with students to really realize if someone is in the wrong level. So it's not necessarily an easy problem to solve, and it does happen. Okay, let's move on. Limited speaking practice. So this is a big problem which happens in the majority of, I think, language courses worldwide. Has anyone experienced this problem? This particularly happens in schools and in state education. I think that people often associate the problem of limited speaking practice with state schools and with educational institutions, particularly when there's a non-native teacher. That, of course, is not the non-native teacher's fault. It's just that state school education is more likely to have a non-native teacher leading the instruction. And the problem really relates a little bit to the number of students, but also it relates to the methodology. So often the methodology is very prescriptive in educational institutions like state schools. There's a course book to follow, there's an exam, there are exercises, and as such, there might not be time for freer speaking practice. Or the teacher might say, well, the student's level is too low because they don't know how to speak yet. And these sorts of issues come up. It can also just be an issue with training, where the teacher has not really been trained on communicative language teaching and in the techniques which a teacher can use to facilitate and enable speaking practice, even with very low levels of students. It is possible. Derek has just mentioned about the incorrect level, said that he joined an IELTS class once, and they arranged a 5.0 class for me, and I felt like I was a native speaker at the time. All right. What else can go wrong in English courses? So we can also have poor teacher quality. Now, I know that this is something which students worry about quite a lot, and I have to say, this is something that you should worry about. And it's a little bit difficult. It's a really difficult issue, actually, to talk about, and there's a few reasons for that. Primarily, I think that as a professional and working in a professional institution, we really avoid talking about individual teachers. So if a student comes to the director of studies and says, I want to change my class, then the director of studies will say, well, why do you want to change your class? And then the student might say, I don't like the style of this teacher. I prefer this other teacher. Now, at that point, in the majority of institutions, the director of studies will refuse to change a student from a class like that. What they will say is that they will want details as to why the student doesn't like the teacher, and then they will approach it as a training opportunity with the teacher. So they will offer to do an observation and give feedback to the teacher. Basically, they treat it like a complaint, but often they will refuse to change the student to another class. And the professional rationale for this is we don't want different classes to become like popularity contests where the most popular teacher gets more students, you know? Now, obviously, that's the professional perspective. And that is it's the policy which most professional institutions will take. And really, they have to take that, because otherwise, I mean, how could you handle such a difficult situation where you're having to tell one teacher, I'm sorry, you're just not as popular as this other teacher, so we're reducing your contract, or we're going to pay you less, or you're fired even. You know, everyone wants to have classes with this other teacher. It's a really difficult issue. However, from a student perspective, it's a very real concern. And as a teacher, I will validate that concern and say to you, yes, it is something you should be concerned about, because it might not be very professional to say it, but there is a variation in quality between instructors. That's simply factual. And I say this fully aware that there are instructors who are superior to me on occasion, or perhaps in general. So we know that there, and especially when it comes to individual students, because students can also have a preference for different teaching styles, different personalities, even a preference between male teachers and female teachers. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought, well, you know, I hope I get a female teacher, or I hope I get a male teacher? I think there really are preferences like that. And I think there's often good reasons for those preferences. It's very controversial to talk about, and we go into areas of stereotyping and bias and so on and so on. But I think we can, to some extent, validate those concerns, and at least we can say it is something to think about. Now, my recommendation for you on this topic, if you start a course and you give the teacher a good chance, because you need to give them a chance. You might not like them right away, because there is also this phenomenon of kind of binding to your teacher. So then when you get a different teacher, you kind of like, who is this person? Why do they think they can teach? I want Rich. He was great. Who's this Samantha? I don't know I don't like the way she teaches, right? But you have to give them a chance, right? You have to wait, do a few classes, give it at least a couple of weeks, okay? At least a couple of weeks. So let's say 3 weeks, a good 3 weeks of classes. And if after 3 weeks, you're still like, this doesn't work for me, then here is how you must approach it. When you go and speak to the director of studies, I'm afraid we're going to have to tell a white lie here. Don't say that you want to change because of the teacher, because that creates a situation where the institution cannot allow that. They have to retrain the teacher. They can't allow it to be a personality contest. So the way to approach this is that you say that you want to change, but use an external reason. I have a schedule conflict. I can't do afternoons anymore. I can't do mornings anymore. Whatever it is. Just make it simple. It's a white lie, but it avoids... Basically, it means you will get a change because institutions will often offer you an alternative slot if you can't make that time. And also, it just avoids having to deal with the impossible situation where the institution won't be able to help you. They really won't. They cannot say, oh, you prefer that teacher? Okay, I'll take you out of that class, because it's completely unprofessional, even though it's a real thing. So there are my comments on that. Of course, there is also the situation where at a low quality institution, maybe all the teachers are poor quality. And I think that Manuel Gordillo might have a bit to say about this on Escuela Oficial de Idiomas. However, Manuel's not here today, I don't think. But what I do want to say about that is, even if you pay a lot of money and you go to a better institution, it doesn't guarantee that you'll get a good teacher. There is definitely a higher probability. That is certain. If you go to an institution with more experienced, more highly qualified teachers, and it's a more prestigious institution, there is definitely a much higher chance of getting a high quality teacher. However, it definitely does not guarantee it. Every single institution where I've worked has not had a complete set of perfect teachers. I've never seen that, and I don't even know if it's possible. Just like every class doesn't have a perfect set of students. So it's always a possibility. All right, let's move on to the next area. So the next thing we can consider is the expense. The cost. And this is probably what comes to people's minds when they think of institutions such as the British Council or pre-sessional English courses. These courses can be very expensive. Pre-sessional English courses will cost you thousands of pounds for maybe an 8-week course, 6 or an 8-week course, thousands of pounds. And the British Council can be all kinds of different costs depending on where you are, but wherever you are, it's on the higher end of the spectrum. Expense is a big deal. And I think what I would say to anyone is, if the expense is a big sacrifice, like you're having to change your diet to afford your English course, then perhaps you should consider a cheaper course. Because I think in terms of the value of English courses, going back to the start of the class, they are very valuable. However, they are what I would call a luxury. They are not a basic requirement. You can certainly live without English courses, and you can certainly improve your language without them. So if it's a case of eating just rice for a month to afford a British Council course, don't do it. Okay? Prioritize healthy food and self-study and watching Professor Rich on YouTube, and don't worry about English courses. Okay? It should never be a really deep sacrifice to take an English course. Then finally, we have inefficient ways of learning. Now, what do I mean by that compared to teacher quality? So, inefficient ways of learning means we've got the book, we have the class, we have the other students, and we have to consider that compared to a really dedicated student or even one-to-one classes, there is always going to be an institutional inefficiency. So whenever we have a top-down curriculum with even a customized scheme of work, we're going to face the problem of inefficiency in our learning process. we can do our best to make the course as effective and efficient as possible. And really, that's one of my specialist areas. It's an area that I'm highly interested in and motivated to improve in, even conduct research in. However, there's always going to be some degree of inefficiency compared to effective, targeted self-study or private, high-quality one-to-one classes. There's a few comments here. Let's just have a look at this. Pachu has said, I had poor teachers at high school. I think that's a pretty common situation, actually. Alexander said, is it not too old-fashioned to learn English online in classes, especially after COVID and technological revolutions? I don't see myself... Oh, offline. I don't see myself in a class at all. Well, you know what's interesting about that, Alexander? There's a few comments, I think, that we can make about that. We can talk about that a little bit. So, first of all, surprisingly, offline learning made a real comeback, actually, after COVID. And that comeback has continued. And actually, I think that there is a real passion for offline learning that actually a lot of people have. And I think in a weird way, in the world of sort of artificial intelligence and disconnection, I think that there are some things that people actually value more about face-to-face classes now, like just having real human contact and actually being in a room with people doing stuff. You can see that people have a sense that, oh, this is special, you know, in a way that before all the technology and the online and the AI, people didn't think like that. But it's like, it's almost become, what's the word? Like vintage and like speciality to be in person in a room. So rather than seeing it as a negative thing, as it's kind of old-fashioned and archaic, I think actually there's sort of a positive, real connection to it. It's kind of like how I keep going on about taking handwritten notes. I mean, what's all that about? Handwritten notes? Come on, Rich. They're 2,000 years out of date. You know, they were doing that when they wrote the Old Testament, right? But actually, I think there's some real value in handwritten notes and real physical books and physical classrooms as well. Of course, I think the major advantage which technology and online learning will always have over offline learning is cost effectiveness and convenience. It's so cost effective and it's so convenient to learn online. However, in terms of quality, I do think that the quality is higher in a face-to-face class. This is as a teacher who I taught only online for almost 3 years. And then I returned to a hybrid model where I have my own business teaching online. I teach online also for universities. Recently, I taught for the University of Newcastle for the pre-sessional Into course over the summer. And I also teach face-to-face at my community college. And I do prefer face-to-face classes, and I do think they are the most effective. But obviously, there's a big issue of convenience. You have to come to class physically. That's difficult. You have to fit a schedule. With online classes, it's so easy for me to say, oh, I can't do next Monday. Let's do Wednesday instead. It's really easy to do that. But with in-person classes, you need a room. You need to inform all the students. You need to physically be there. Like, there's all kinds of difficulties with changing schedule. So it's way less flexible. So I can totally understand your perspective. Pachu says, why are English courses so expensive? Why are we restricting people to study English from good institutions? I mean, it's just a question of quality and the market, Pachu. It's the way things are. It's the same. We could say the same thing about medicine, right? Okay, so for example, let's talk about dentistry, okay? Now, my teeth are all right, but they could do with some work. They could do with a clean and a polish. Maybe I need a filling here or something, right? So why are we restricting that for me? Why can't I just go and get that? Why do I have to find a private dentist and pay £500 to get that done? Which is, by the way, why I'm not doing it, because I have other things like food that I want to spend my money on, and technology that I want to spend my money on. So why are we restricting dental care, Pachu? It's the same thing. On the other side of the coin, Pachu, there are ways that we are spreading the English language in a more accessible way. And that really goes to the things that Alexander was talking about, that we have this online learning, we've got technologies, we've got YouTube, free websites. That's really the way that English is being accessible to all. So you're never going to get high quality individual instruction accessible to all, just like you won't get a very top doctor going around and giving everyone free high quality medical care. It just can't happen, because it's just not the way that expertise and the market work. You know, I mean, think about my situation, right? I've been involved in this for 16 years. I've been involved with this for 16 years. I've spent probably in the realm of, well, let's say many thousands of pounds on qualifications, and I'm still spending money on qualifications, and I'm still working very hard to improve them. Now, yeah, it'd be great. I can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to India next year, and I'm going to spend the next 10 years teaching people English for free. I mean, that would be a very admirable thing to do. I wish I was as charitable a person as that. I wish I was as good a person as to just go, right, I'm going to just go there and volunteer the rest of my life to teach people English. But, you know, I have my own goals and objectives. I have family goals, I have professional goals, I have dreams, aspirations, I have hobbies that I want to do. And, you know, all of that, none of that's going to happen if I just turn my life into doing that for free, right? So, you know, realistically, that's why that doesn't happen. However, we do have accessible options. I've got my channel here. That's free. That's freely available for anyone who wants to watch. There's applications you can use. There are many websites out there with free tools and free resources you can use to learn. So I think that is the compromise. Derek says, teach the human, the problem, the currency value. Yes, that's true, Derek. And that's really why when you get international teachers coming into Vietnam, for example, you need to pay them a lot of money, because you're asking them to travel halfway across the world. And particularly if they've got skills and experience, then that's going to cost a lot, just like in medicine and other situations. And Alexander says, let's call them orthodox learners. Are the orthodox the in-class learners or the online learners? And maybe the online learners are the Protestants. They've had the online Reformation, sola, what would it be? Not sola scripturum, but sola online technologium. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure this metaphor particularly works, Alexander. But anyway, I love classroom learning. Lovely bit of language there from Julia, is right on the money. And Pachu says, I strongly disagree. It should be compared with money. It's the entity that everyone should get a high level of education. You know, I think I agree with the idea there, Pachu. And I think if we lived in a community-based society, let's say, for example, that we lived in a society where I could go to a 100-person community and teach English for free, and in return, I could go and eat at the restaurant for free, I could sleep at the hotel for free, I could go to the computer shop and get computer parts for free, then I agree with you. That is perfect. But unfortunately, me and other teachers, we need to pay for our food, pay for our hotel, and pay for our computers. And so we can't just go and give education for free. But I agree with the idea. I think it's a great idea. I mean, it's a lovely ideal to have that one day maybe we'll have a community, a government system, or just a situation which allows that kind of thing to happen. Education's so critical. You know, on the other side, Pachu, by the way, maybe teachers should be paid more. Have we ever thought about that? Why is it that famous actors, and how much do Bollywood actors get paid? Do they do more good than teachers? All right, so this is what goes wrong in the course. Let's have a chat about what goes right. In other words, why bother? So I've spoken to you a lot here about the negatives. These are almost the things that can go wrong about having an English course. And now you might think, well, you know what? I don't want to risk all that. That sounds pretty bad. So actually, I'm not going to study English. I'm not going to take a course. I'll do it myself. I don't need a teacher. How about considering why might be a good idea to do it? This is coming from someone who is I am a massive advocate of self-teaching, autonomous learning. I myself am self-taught in Spanish, and I've learned some German, some French, some Japanese on my own. I am learning Vietnamese on my own, but also supported by my incredibly supportive Vietnamese wife. So obviously I kind of have a teacher there, although anyone who's married to a teacher knows that it's a different thing to be taught by your spouse rather than to be taught in a professional way. I definitely don't teach her English. It just doesn't work for me as a professional teacher, but she certainly does assist me with that. However, I am a big advocate for self-learning. But coming from me, I do still think language courses can offer advantages. So why? What advantages do they offer? Have a think, type your ideas in chat. I'm going to have a little drink from my coffee. It's interesting. I've just had a look at the poll in chat. 55% of people say that they have recently started or will start a new course soon. That's fantastic. That's a higher number than I expected, actually. So we've got quite a few people in chat who are starting a new course soon. Not necessarily an English learning course, but some sort of course nonetheless. I think that's a good point, Derek. And that may be one of the things that I'm going to talk about. Now, Sleepwalker's mentioned what personally I see as a red herring. A red herring is kind of a trick which might not be the best reason. However, you're absolutely right that a lot of students see that as being one of, if not the most important reason for having a language course. Personally, I strongly disagree with that as being a very useful aspect of a language course, but students love it. They love it. And the teacher's method of learning, yes. So let's have a look at the ideas that I've got here. So first and foremost, in fact, expert guidance. Ideally, we're going to get guidance from someone who, first of all, 1, knows the language, 2, knows how to teach the language, and 3, has experience teaching the language and dealing with the problems that learners face. So it's not only about an expert in the language, it's not only about an expert in teaching, but it's an expert in the language, an expert in teaching, and someone who has experience dealing with the problems that learners face. Of course, we have to temper that with the comment that I made before that you may not necessarily get as high a quality teacher as you'd hoped. Motivation and routine, and I think this is a big one actually, and one of the interesting things about this is even with a kind of mediocre quality course, you still get this benefit where you have the routine and you have the motivation. You know, when there's an exam coming up, you're gonna study no matter what. You're gonna study no matter what. So that's gonna help you. And it really is a big issue for many people. I think a lot of people really struggle to self-motivate. It's not easy to self-motivate. You know, I think when you're younger, it's a bit easier. And as you get older, it becomes a little bit more difficult, or easier for some people, depending. However, a lot of people, I think, do really benefit from having that routine. It triggers them to think about English, triggers them to study, and ideally, we have a motivational instructor who's going to push you forward and make you feel positive about it. Practice opportunities. So ideally, in a communicative language learning class, you will have opportunities to practice your speaking in particular, also your writing, normally in homework with feedback in class. However, we can also incorporate writing activities into speaking activities in class. That can be great. And a bit of reading and a bit of listening. And overall, we should have the ability to practice communication, because obviously communication is the fundamental, the absolutely most critical paradigm of language learning. It's what we really want to learn the language for. And a communicative language class should give you plenty of opportunity to communicate in your language of choice. And actually, it can be very difficult for some people to get those practice opportunities. If you're living in a country where English is not widely spoken or even not spoken at all, then of course practice opportunities can be few and far between. So being in a class and being able to practice in a class can be really helpful. Personalization. So this is a kind of a higher order skill, I suppose. It's not that higher order. Any qualified teacher should learn about personalization and the importance of it. Personalization is a big deal. This is basically taking a class and making it relevant or making it applicable in some way to your students in terms of interest, in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their age, in terms of their nationality, you know? So, for example, if I was going to teach about the past simple to Bulgarians, then I'm not going to, for example, go right in with a class about ancient Mesopotamian archaeology, unless they happen to be ancient Mesopotamian archaeologists from Bulgaria, in which case I might. The point is that with personalization, you have that opportunity to make the material relevant to your students, and that's important. Because, by the way, it's not just about relevance. It's not just a question of this is going to be useful for you. It's also a question of, do you understand it and do you care about it? You know, think now, what things do you care about? What do you actually care about? I think that me and Alexander, for example, could have a really interesting English class on the differences between Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant Christianity. And I think we could probably spend many, many hours on reading texts and discussion material and debates, error correction, and all kinds of stuff on that topic, because we're both super interested in it. But if I were to do that same class with someone who is strongly atheist or maybe a very committed Hindu, then they might not actually care at all about that. So it'd be totally inappropriate. And that's kind of the point of personalization, that we are helping someone to learn things which are both relevant to them and that they are interested in. It's a really big deal. It was one of my early aha moments when I was training as a teacher, was personalization. And it's something which really goes to the heart of my teaching as well. It's close to, it's really one of my foundational principles in how I plan classes. Moving on, we have progress tracking. So many people find it difficult to track progress, and that includes teachers as well as students. Tracking progress is a bugbear of a lot of people. And even when progress is tracked, it often becomes this kind of box ticking exercise where you'll sort of do your quarterly tests. Oh, we do the test and the midterm and the quarterly test and the progress test and the exam at the end of the course, and tick. Now you know B1, you can go to B2, right? It's a rudimentary way of tracking progress. It is more effective than nothing. However, there are even more effective ways of tracking progress, such as recording yourself giving a speech and comparing how the recordings progress over time. That can be an effective way. A really effective way can be formative feedback from a teacher one-to-one, which is something that I strongly believe should be the part of any effective language learning course. Formative feedback. That means I'm giving you feedback, but I'm not giving you a grade which will go on your grade sheet. Instead, it's feedback based on my observation and expertise, which is intended to help you grow as a learner. And that kind of one-to-one formative feedback can also be seen as a form of progression. There are problems of reliability with that, though. Obviously, a teacher doesn't want to tell their student that, yes, you've studied with me for the last 3 months, but you haven't progressed at all. Because obviously the potential response there is, well, you're the teacher, so why haven't I progressed? You see? So progress tracking is definitely a thorny area. Nonetheless, it tends to be better implemented on a course than someone who's just learning on their own. Like when I was learning Spanish on my own, I don't think I really had any formal way of tracking my progress. And of course, feedback. Yes, everybody loves error correction and feedback. I'm sure that anyone here who takes a language course, one of your primary motivations was to get error correction and feedback. Students love it. Teachers may love it, depending on the teacher. Personally, I'm not a big fan. I know it is necessary, but I tend to be a bit more resistant to it than let's say some other teachers, and certainly students. Students just want error correction all the time. And in my experience and from the studies and research that I've read, it's not really that effective. Actually, the process of kind of informal feedback from conversations and also just natural language learning tends to get everything in line without having a sort of formal, here's your mistakes, now fix them kind of feedback. Although I do like to do that as well. I think every class should have some element of error correction like that, but just not 30 minutes dedicated to it, you know? Anyway, it is a positive which you get from a language course. So that's it. So these are all the reasons why you might actually want to study a language course. And now we're going to start talking about what you can do to make the most of a course, which actually is the topic of the class today. So it's taken me 50 minutes to get to today's topic. Just before I move on to that, I'm going to have a little drink of coffee and I'm going to full screen it. And does anyone have any questions or comments so far? Cow, hello, how you doing? You came in just as Derek left. Is this like tag team, the Vietnamese tagging in and tagging out? Pachu says, I'm sure if anybody studies with a native speaker, he will become an excellent student. I personally would say that there's a little bit of mythos going on there, Pachu. The mythology of the magic gold-lined streets of London and the magic pill of a native speaker. I don't think it's necessarily as critical as you might think. Oh, he's still here. Alrighty. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on to the next section of today's class? All right, so I'm going to start today by asking you, what physical resources, materials, what things should you purchase, buy, acquire before you start a new course? What do you think? What things, if you want to just maximize your performance on an English course, what things should you buy, purchase, acquire, and bring to the first class? Very simple area. Maybe some of you haven't thought about this since primary school, but we're going to think about it right now. What do you think? I think so, Alexander. Tandem is for language exchange, is that right? I've never used it. So Alexander's mentoring I guess it's a self-study book or a resource book, which is the IELTS by Cambridge. So an IELTS course book or study book from Cambridge English. Is that right? Any other comments? Is that it? So we're just going to bring extracurricular study material. Anything else? Free materials are great, but what else? I mean, you're just so far you're talking about learning materials, but what about physical things? What other physical things are you going to bring to course? Okay, we've got some general advice. Don't be shy. Try to practice. Great. Are there any physical things that we could bring? Physical things? Just our hands. Oh, a nice notebook, Alexander. Yes, a nice notebook. I know this one looks a bit tatty, but actually, I kind of like how it looks. I love the colors, the kind of green and red. Yeah. By the way, I haven't actually decided what to. Oh, I did use this. Oh, fantastic. And a pen. All right. And 3D glasses. What? Our school provides us with 3D glasses. How do you use those? You have like 3D videos? All right, let's move on then. So here's my ideas about things to bring. Number one. Ding, 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 ding. A nice notebook. Well done. That was on my list of things to bring. And I think it is important to have a nice notebook. A5. A4 is okay, but it's a bit big. And personally, I prefer A5. But okay, your choice, A4 or A5. Now, we can actually make a distinction, in fact, between an A5 notebook and this kind of notebook, which, sorry, is not actually A5. This is actually A7. A7. So, one of these. A pocket notebook, A7. A6 is okay as well. So basically what we're saying is two notebooks. You've got your A5 and your A7, your pocket and your kind of desk notebook. And I think there's a good reason to have two like that. You've got one which you can use at any time to make little notes about vocabulary, phrases, things like that. And then you've got the other one, which is for the class or for dedicated vocabulary, your special vocabulary treasure trove. Next, I think you should consider some sort of organization system, some way of keeping all of your notes together. There's a reason for this, because teachers will give you handouts. They will give you loads of resources. Now, what are you going to do with those resources? Because I think what happens to a lot of students is that they put all their handouts in a big pile and they go on the table and it's a big mess and they never look at them and they go in the bin. So if you have some sort of folder or organization tool, I think that can be really helpful for keeping everything organized, keeping your handouts together and actually increasing the possibility that you're going to look at them, revise them, and use them. A nice pen. A nice pen. Not some of those cheap biros which don't write very well and will fall apart and you'll lose them and not care about them. Get yourself a nice pen. Okay? Just like Alexander said, a nice notebook. Get yourself a nice pen. Okay, I know it might sound a little bit silly, and I don't mean like spend £100 on a pen, okay? Not that. But, okay, £10? £15 maybe? Then you know it's going to be a pen that you're going to take care of, and that you're going to write with carefully. You feel a little bit attached to, a little bit proud of as you make your notes and study on your course. I don't think we should overlook these seemingly esoteric things. I think actually they can contribute to effective learning. And finally, I think everyone should have a couple of highlighters in their back pocket. Highlighters are great, super useful for highlighting notes, for highlighting reading texts, and they make things look attractive, they draw your eye, and you can even have a sort of system where different kinds of highlight mean different things. For example, the blue highlight is new vocabulary. Yellow highlight is something the teacher told you to pay attention to. A red highlight is something which you don't understand and want to ask a question about. So these are the things that I would recommend that everyone brings to their English course. Patrick says a lot of people use a dot pen, not an ink pen. What's a dot pen? Dot pen. A dot pen. Oh, you mean ballpoint? It still has ink, right? It still uses ink. We call it a ballpoint pen. Because the end is like a ball instead of this one here is a fountain pen. You don't need a fountain pen, by the way. Personally, I don't use a fountain pen. I use a ballpoint pen, which I think is what you call a dot pen here. A ballpoint. Yeah, that's right, Patrick. It's a ballpoint pen. I use a ballpoint pen as well. But we can still have an expensive one. Not an expensive one, a nice quality one, not like a cheap one, you know? Cheap, plastic, horrible thing. Get something nice. Okay? It's important. You want to make the most of the course. If you spent £500 on your English course, you can spend £6 on your pen. Yeah, highlighters are great. Pencil with an eraser better than a pen. So, personally, I'm not a big pencil person. I understand the value of being able to erase things, but to be honest, with a pen, I can cross it out, or I can just rip out the page, throw it away, and do another one. So I like how a pen stands out on the page, and the thing that I don't like about a pencil is it can be a little bit hard to see sometimes. So that's the reason why I prefer using a pen. But I think this is a question of personal preference, Cal. If you are more of a pencil person, then use a pencil. For sure, we can say that being able to erase and correct is an advantage. And with pens, you can't do that. Correction fluid is horrible. Erasable pens are not good. I don't like them. So pencils definitely have that advantage, but I just prefer how a pen kind of jumps off the page. It's just my perspective. All right, so they are my comments on what I think you should bring to your new course. Now, let's have a little chat about note-taking methods. This is quite a big area, I think, and it's one of the things that when you're going to study a new course, you should definitely be aware of different ways to take notes. We're not just going to scribble any old thing down in our notebook. Instead, we're going to have different note-taking methods that we can use in different situations. And here are 3 that I particularly like and which I personally use. So let's just talk about these 3 note-taking methods and the situations when to use them. First of all, I'm going to just show you pictures of those 3, and you can consider those left to right as 1, 2, 3. So above me, we've got 1, and then there we've got 2, and way over on the other side is 3. So it's 1, 2, 3. Okay. And I want you to tell me, what do you think each of those note-taking methods are called? I did just show you, so maybe you'll remember. What's number 1, what's number 2, and what is number 3? And once you've named those in the chat, then I'll tell you the situations which I think it's best to use each of those. And we may also, by the way, want to think about brainstorming also as something to put in there. And maybe mind maps as well. Pachu says, when I am making notes, my mind starts to think. Is it a waste of time? Can you say a little about it? Pachu, do you mean that you start to question whether making notes is worth it? Is that what you mean? Like you start to doubt whether making notes is worth it? What I will say to you, Pachu, is that making notes is very valuable. Making any kind of notes, using any type of notes, is always superior to making no notes at all in terms of retention. So you will retain more by making any kind of notes than making no notes at all. So actually, I think that there's a big advantage there, whatever you do with notes. But the other thing I would say to you, Pachu, is that if you become more familiar with different note-taking methods, you might become more confident in how useful they can be. For example, One way of making notes could be to just write everything down in your own words, right? So you read something and then you write it down in your own words. I can't remember off the top of my head the specific name of that method. It's called re-something. It's like when you take something and paraphrase it, can't remember. But personally, I'm not a big fan of that method because it involves a lot of writing. And although it is effective for exam study, it's not particularly engaging beyond that. And I think this kind of extensive writing, I know some teachers like it. And in fact, there's even quite a lot of research to indicate that extensive writing is very useful for learning. But I personally find it physically taxing, like your hand aches from all the writing you do. So that's why I'm not a big proponent of that sort of, what do you call it? I really can't think of the word. But anyway, when you just paraphrase the whole thing and write it all out. Rather, I think of notes as being the key points, the key words, the bullet points, the highlights, right? We're not going to write everything down. We don't need to write everything down. We're just going to put some things in, the key information, to help me remember, to help me process it, okay? And in that case, I think note-taking is invaluable, really. And especially when you learn about the different methods of note-taking and how you can use these different methods of note-taking. So looking at the top there, we have number one. Number one is sketch notes. Number two is outline, and number three is Cornell. So none of those are paraphrase and write them all out like Pachu was talking about. They're all different to that. I would say outline is the most simple. Outline is basically, we're writing kind of like bullet points and a contents page. So as you're listening to someone talk, you write topic, bullet points, topic, bullet points, topic, bullet points. Okay, and that's the kind of outline method. That's your go-to. So if you're picking up a pen and you're just going to make notes on something the teacher's talking about, then that's a good opportunity to use that sort of outline method. You're just going to scribble things down with a little bit of organization. Then the next one we can talk about is sketch notes. So sketch notes are good when you're listening to an extended talk or an extended lecture on a specific subject. For example, this lesson right now, you could have used sketch notes to make notes of the whole lesson while I'm talking. Sketch notes are a bit more dynamic. They involve creativity. And the point of sketch notes is as you go, you just allow yourself to get a bit artistic with your notes. You draw little diagrams, you want arrows, you want symbols. Now, personally, the way that I use sketch notes is I take sketch notes and I integrate them into the other methods, particularly Cornell. So when I'm actually making Cornell notes, what I'll do is instead of just making bullet points, sometimes I'll draw little diagrams and make kind of a mini sketch note section as well. So it's kind of an integration of those methods. And personally, I think that helps me the most, that occasionally I'll draw a few diagrams and it catches your eye as well, you know, rather than just looking at a wall of text, you can see your notes and you can see some little diagrams scattered around and it's more engaging, helps you to remember. So I think that sort of integration can be useful. So let's talk about Cornell notes exactly. Like, when should we use Cornell notes? So I think overall, in a communicative language class, it would be difficult to use Cornell notes for the whole class because a language class is so dynamic. And Cornell notes, one of the disadvantages of Cornell notes is that they are quite structured. So you sort of need something to have kind of logical sections. Otherwise, Cornell notes don't particularly work. So actually, the best situation for Cornell notes is when you're in a language class. It'd be when you're listening to an audio. So if you get a situation where the teacher says, now we're going to listen to this conversation for 5 minutes, right? And they don't give you another task, then making Cornell notes would be a good option. And with Cornell notes, the approach is simply like this. You start out by drawing a margin down the side of the page. So draw a line here. And then we're going to make notes, just text notes with a bit of sketching if you want, in chronological order. That means as it's mentioned, you make notes all the way down the page. Okay? And then when the listening finishes, then we're going to go through and we're going to, in the margin, we're going to write the categories of each of the things that we wrote on the left. So we're basically going to post hoc, like after the fact, we're going to categorize our notes. That's really all Cornell note-taking is. Now, some people recommend that those categories on the left be in the form of questions, where you consider whatever the content is here in your main section, you consider the question which that content answers. And this can be useful when you're preparing for exams. You can actually see that in my example up there. It says, how does printing money cause problems? Right there as one of the categories. However, personally, I think we can be flexible with the categories in the margin, and we can use any category that seems to make sense to us. It's a great opportunity for a bit of engagement and personalization. The very fact that you need to think about this when you do it is what makes it useful, because you're engaging with it. We're not just writing robotically as we listen. That's the point, right? That's really one of the main things about notes. You see, people, when we make notes, people think it's because we're going to review them. But actually, in my opinion, that's not the case. Most of the time, we don't review our notes. So I would say, from my perspective, the reason to make notes is for the engagement. It's the fact that you're having to think about it, categorize it, and put it all together. And just doing that is helpful, even if we never look at them again. Of course, if we do look at them again and they look lovely and they've got some sketch notes in there, well, that's a bonus. All right, so that's my little bit on note-taking. Let's move on. What other advice can you give Rich when preparing for a course? Form a study group. Now, this is most applicable for higher level courses, intellectual courses, master's courses, and things like that, I will admit. However, you can apply it to any course that you do. It is something which I do personally. If any of you, for example, in the future, have the misfortune of having me as a fellow student with you, then one thing that you will notice is that I will proactively create a WhatsApp group if no one else does it. And then I will form a study group and I will invite people to set study sessions, to sit down together, consider what material we learned in class that week and talk about it. And I guess that one of the reasons why I do that is that I've just been trained as a communicative language teacher to communicate to people about the things that I'm learning. So I just feel proactively like that's what I should do. And I really like doing that. I think it's a good thing to do. It doesn't take that much, it's enjoyable. You need 60 minutes of time, a cup of coffee, some of the material from the class, sit down with 3 or 4 other students and have a conversation. And personally, I find you can get a lot out of that. And remember also, if you feel like, oh, these students are not at my level, they're lower than me, so what can I get from them? Well, just remember this. Teaching is one of the most effective ways of learning. So having to teach people something is one of the best damn ways to learn about it. So if you do think that your level is higher and you think, well, I'm not going to get anything from these sessions, actually, you're going to get the most out of it because you need to reformulate your teaching and explain things to people. We've got a question here from Alexander. He says, should I try to write each letter separately like in the presented notes? It's rather difficult. Write each letter separately like in the presented notes. Let me just take a look at that, Alexander, to try and work out what your... Oh, no. No, not at all. Not at all. No. Just handwrite naturally. Don't worry about that. Remember that with notes, these are going back to the notes question, just a quick thing to answer Alexander's inquiry here. Number one, the important thing is that you can read them. It doesn't matter about anyone else. So don't worry if someone else can't read your notes. You just write in any way you want. If you want, you can write in code. If you want, you can write in shorthand. Whatever, doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. You don't need to write in any particular style. Okay. However, that said, number 2, do try to make them look nice to you. So you want your notes to be pleasant for you to look at. Doesn't matter if they're all caps or handwritten or whatever. Don't care about that. That's up to you. It's your preference. But do try to make them like something that you want to look at. Let me give you an example, a bad example of some notes that I made recently. Okay. So I'm going to show you a piece of paper that I'm quite embarrassed about, but I want to just show it to make a point. So look at that, right? That looks horrible. Okay. I don't want to look at that. I want to put that in the bin, right? Now, the reason why it looks horrible is I was interviewing someone at the time and it was quite an intense conversation. And so I didn't have time to make really nice notes. But the thing is, this horrible piece of paper is something that just looks disgusting on my desk and I want to throw it in the bin. You don't want your notes to be like that because that's what happens, right? So we want our notes to be really as presentable as we can. If you have the luxury of taking your time, making them look nice, then do it. Yeah, I'm well aware of this, Alexander. I teach quite a lot of Ukrainians at the moment, and they have a very round cursive style, which I think is something that in Eastern Europe and Russia and so on is the more the style that people learn. It's absolutely fine. Don't worry about that. You don't have to write a certain way. Right, so let's go back to talking about forming a study group. We're talking about forming a study group. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great thing to do. So let's have a little bit of a discussion about why. Why bother? What a waste of time. I don't have the time to organize things with people and spend 60 minutes sitting around with a coffee. Well, maybe you should. Here's some reasons. First of all, we've got reinforcement. Reinforcement is one of the classic ways of learning. And the thing about study group reinforcement is we're not just doing the flashcard like coche, car. It's better reinforcement than that because it's reinforcement that also has a social affective depth. There's some social and emotive interaction and connection going on, which really help to facilitate that reinforcement. Motivation, it's motivational. So we are social animals and having social interactions is intrinsically motivational. intrinsically means it's a fundamental characteristic of the definition of social, which is that it's motivational because we are social creatures. We are intrinsically motivated by social interaction, both positively and negatively, by the way. And actually, that's important in terms of study group, because if you've decided to meet a group of people to study something, it's difficult for you to drop out. There's a negative motivational factor which actually pushes you to go and study, because you don't want to disappoint people and you don't want to upset people by cancelling unnecessarily. There's the opportunity for resource sharing. Now, of course, you might say, well, yeah, but we can do that on WhatsApp or we can do that online and whatever. That's true, but you'd be surprised when you sit down with someone and suddenly you see that they've got a copy of Raymond Murphy's grammar book, English Grammar in Use. And you're like, what's that? Why didn't you tell me about that before? That looks great. Can I have a photocopy of that? Suddenly you notice all of these other resources that people have, and people are often very happy to share those resources, of course. So I think that it is one of the benefits, and it is something that you discover when you really just sit down with someone and start studying with them. You start realizing these extra little resources they've got, and that triggers you to think, oh, that's good. For example, apps. Not everyone even realizes all the apps that they use to learn English, but then suddenly you see them in a study group and they're on their phone talking to ChatGPT and talking about something and using it for some sort of grammar discussion in the study group, and you're like, hey, why didn't you mention that before? It just slipped my mind. A bit of structured learning. Does anything more need to be said about that? I've already mentioned as part of a course that it's good to have a structure. And if you start having a weekly study session with your classmates, it just adds a layer of structure. Something that I've noticed that the students at the college tend to do is that they'll often go for a coffee about 30 minutes before the class, and then they'll go for another coffee at the break time. And in both those coffee sessions, they definitely talk about stuff from the class. And I know that because they come back from the break and they start asking questions, which means that what's happened is they've gone to the cafe, talked to other students, realize that the questions they have are the same as the questions that other people have, and then they have the confidence to come back to the class and say, Rich, can I ask about something? And that's great, right? So that's adding some structure into their life, a routine which is part of their English learning. And again, this is something which relates to study groups. Deep diving. So this is something I personally like. I'm an intellectual person. I love to engage in intellectual discussions. I'm not particularly clever, but I still enjoy engaging in intelligent conversation. And so really getting into the deep fundamentals or the deep nuanced issues, it's something that I enjoy. And I think study groups are a great opportunity for that. Whereas in class, what you have to realize is the teacher has to appeal to everyone. So there's not always the opportunity to dive so deeply, because you might lose some people who are still kind of at the shallow level. But in a study group, especially when in a more intimate environment, you can kind of go deeper. And that kind of exploration can, one, raise questions, which you can then ask the teacher about. And two, it can, well, you can make intellectual discoveries, maybe even above and beyond things that the teacher understands themselves. I found that when I studied my master's, that sometimes having discussions about the material with other students would lead to realizations which I don't think the lecturer would be able to give us alone. Peer feedback. It's an opportunity for peer feedback. Peer feedback is brilliant. I always try to encourage peer feedback. There is the big bugbear that students have about peer feedback that, oh, but I don't know what's right and wrong, and you're the teacher, you should do the correction, and What if they tell me something is wrong and it's right or whatever? Yeah, well, that's life. And that can also happen with the teachers as well. The thing is, peer feedback really is the way forward for education. Like, we all need to become teachers and students at everything. It's a part of life. It's a part of communication. Peer feedback is it's critical. And it's something which teachers should encourage in the class, obviously in a sensitive way. We don't want to be that annoying person who's constantly telling someone that their English is bad. That's definitely not what peer feedback is. When I say peer feedback, I'm talking about doing it in a way which is productive, positive, and useful for both the person giving feedback and the person receiving it. So study groups are a great opportunity for that. And okay, if you get into a conversation like, I don't know if what you said is right, I don't know if what I said is right, then what do? Make a note of the question, bring it to class, ask the teacher. Okay, finally, clarification of doubts. Don't think we really need to go any deeper on that. All right, complementary study. So I think this is one of the areas that a lot of you had in your mind when we initially started talking about how to make the most of these courses. I just popped them in case you guys are wondering. So, complementary study. There's certainly no harm in having a nice grammar book, such as English Grammar in Use by Raymond Murphy. I very often recommend Raymond Murphy's books. You can find other ones. Just do a search on Amazon. You'll find grammar books you can get. Absolutely great to do a bit of grammar practice. Don't focus on it too heavily. Grammar is something which I think it's great to brush up on after the fact. I think first, start with the language and then get the grammar involved, rather than starting with the grammar and then getting the language involved. Don't like that way of doing it, but this way around, I think it's absolutely fine. Get yourself a grammar book. Good thing to have. This is a good one. I also recommend, if you want a reference, I recommend Michael Swan, and I think it's called Practical English Usage, something like that. But Michael Swan is the author. And I recommend Martin Parrott, Grammar for English Language Teachers. So they're the reference books that I recommend. In terms of practice books, Raymond Murphy basically is the best one, and there's plenty of others as well. Graded readers. So graded readers are when a publisher takes a popular book, for example, a popular story like Romeo and Juliet or Sherlock Holmes, and then they adapt the English so that it's intermediate or pre-intermediate level or even beginner level. So these are books which are easier to digest. Now, I've made videos about extensive reading, so I'm not going to go into detail about that, but essentially the rationale for graded reading, for extensive reading, is reading should be fun, easy, relevant, and personalized. So we're not looking for difficult texts. We're looking to make reading a fun habit which complements your English course. So graded readers are a great opportunity for that. You know, if you're intermediate and you want to read War and Peace, then get a B1 graded version of War and Peace and read that. And that'll be fun, engaging, something you can sit down for 3 hours and just fly through it. And you're really engaging with English. It's fantastic. So graded readers, highly recommend them. They are quite expensive, but you can often get them from libraries if you're learning at a language institution which has a library, which a lot of them do. Duolingo, it's not great, but it's better than nothing. And I think for beginners in particular, it can be a useful app to go alongside the course. It's super fun. It is super fun. I've been going through the Vietnamese section at the moment, and it's super fun. My wife has informed me that a lot of the things are very formal and not actually what people say, which of course is also my experience with Spanish and English on Duolingo. So there's lots of problems with it, but there's no harm. It's fun, it's engaging, and it's another bit of reinforcement. And even if you use Duolingo and you have the thought, this isn't actually the way that people speak, it's still useful because you're thinking about it and you're having conversations with people saying, oh, this is not actually how people speak, right? So that's actually useful because it's got you thinking about the material. It's kind of like, I know that in Vietnam, a way of saying I is to say tôi. And, you know, I can say something like tôi lang or ang, which means like I'm British, but it's actually not a super common way of saying I'm British because we wouldn't often use tôi to mean I. It's kind of a more formal, distant way. This is my understanding of it. The Vietnamese people in the chat can tell me if I'm right or not. So ELI and CLIL, basically what this means is that you're going to do another course with English as the language of instruction, but the course is not about English, it's about something else. So it's kind of like you've started your English course, and while you do your English course, you're also going to learn how to cook sushi. But the teacher of your sushi course, which could be online or whatever, is an English speaker. So that means you're learning English as part of your English course, and then also you have this other course where you're learning something else, but English is the language of instruction. That's just a fantastic way of complementing your language learning. This is called English as a language for instruction. It can also be called combined language integrated learning or content language integrated learning or whatever else you want to call it. Anyway, it's a very effective method. It's kind of real and authentic, and I'm a big fan of it. Online grammar websites, exercises, YouTube channels like English with Lucy and all of our favorites. And there it is. Podcasts, audiobooks, films and TV, video games. I think we could probably just summarize those as media. I'm a fan of all of them. The only question I would have for these, and that's going all the way from YouTube down to video games, is, do you understand it? That's basically it. Do you understand it? Are you interested? They're the questions to ask. There's no point in having it on if you don't understand it. That means it's too difficult. So if you're watching a TV show, you should really ask yourself, because sometimes we trick ourselves that we're understanding when we're not. So after like 10 minutes, ask yourself, what happened? Do I know what's going on? Does this all make sense? Right? Check that you're actually following it. If you're not, maybe you need something easier. And that's the same for podcasts, audiobooks, films, and video games. The reason why I particularly say that, by the way, comes from personal experience. That when I was a beginner in Spanish, I used to listen to Spanish radio. And I listened to probably about 200, 300 hours of Spanish radio while I was driving, while I was doing stuff, right? And then I realized I don't know anything. I don't understand anything they're saying. Like, I've been listening to this for like 300 hours. I have no idea what's going on, you know? I just knew like a few kind of highlighted phrases that they say, but I didn't really understand it. And that's when I realized there's no point in just doing that. You have to actually understand. So that is a key point. We want to make sure that it's something we understand, and if we don't, get something easier. Okay, so are you interested? Do you understand? And that's your question for YouTube, podcasts, audiobooks, films and TV, video games. And by the way, a great source for most of those is Spotify. So if you can get a Spotify account in your country, I recommend it. YouTube, Spotify. Okay, then we can go to Netflix as well and things like that for your films and TV. Video games, it has to be Steam if you're a PC gamer. Otherwise, you can't go wrong with a Nintendo Switch. Right, let's just, there's one more section that I want to talk about. But before I do, I just want to check some of the comments that people have said here. Patchy says, Duolingo is good because it has practical types of English tasks which we use in daily life. It's definitely better than nothing. And it's probably the best app out there. I just wish that, well, I wish many things, but let's leave it at that. That's absolutely fantastic, Alia. That's probably why you speak English great. Nice one, Derek. That's it. You're doing it. That's English as a language for instruction. Great. So people love the kind of ELI, CLIL type stuff. One of the things you can do, Patchu, is you can use this. First, read the book in your own language or in English, or both. It's up to you. If you really, 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 really like the book, you can read it in your own language and English. Otherwise, choose one. It's absolutely fine to read it just in your own language. Then listen to the audiobook in English. The downside of audiobooks, by the way, is that the way that they speak tends to be quite specific to audiobooks, you know? Like when people read a story, right? When people read a book, they tend to read a certain way. So I'll give you an example. This is from the book Crucial Conversations. Okay, I'm just going to take a random page. Back to the motel. To see how all of the state skills fit together in a touchy conversation, let's return to the motel bill. Only this time, Carol does a far better job of bringing up a delicate issue. Bob. Hi, honey. How was your day? Carol. Not so good. Bob. What is that? Carol. I was checking our credit card bill and I noticed a charge of $48 for the Goodnight Motel down the street. Bob. Boy, that sounds wrong. Carol. It sure does. Bob. Well, don't worry. I'll check into it one day when I'm going by. Carol. I'd feel better if we checked right now. Bob. Really? It's less than $50. It can wait. Carol. It's not the money that has me worried. Bob. You're worried? Carol. It's a motel down the street. You know, that's how my sister found out that Phil was having an affair. She found a suspicious hotel bill. I don't have anything to worry about, do I? What do you think's going on with this bill? Bob. I don't know, but you certainly don't have to worry about me. Carol. I know you've given me no reason to question your fidelity. I don't really believe you're having an affair. It's just that it might help put my mind to rest if we were to check on this right now. Would that bother you? Bob. Not at all. Let's give them a call and find out what's going on. So, the way that I read that then was very much in a sort of narrative voice. And that's the point that I'm making about audiobooks is they often have a narrative voice. They don't necessarily speak in a kind of natural English conversational way. Now, I'm not saying that to put you off audiobooks. I actually think audiobooks are an absolutely fantastic way to complement your English learning, particularly if you do it in the way that I spoke about, Pachu, where, you know, it's your favorite book or it's a book you've read 10 times in your own language and now you're going to listen to it in English. If you're a Christian like me and Alexander, then maybe you could listen to the New International Version Bible in English on audiobook or whatever, you know. So many ways of doing that sort of things. Just to contrast, by the way, if I can find that page again. Can I find that page? I've lost it now. How annoying. Yeah, it's totally gone. I wanted to read again, but in natural English, just to show you how natural English can differ to audiobooks. Yeah, okay. All right, so here's more a natural English approach. To see how all of the state skills fit together in a touchy conversation, let's return to the motel bill. Only this time, Carol does a far better job of bringing up a delicate issue. Bob. Hi, honey, how was your day? Carol. Not so good, actually. Bob, why is that? Carol. Well, I was checking our credit card bill and I noticed a charge of $48 for the Goodnight Motel down the street. Bob. Huh. That's weird. Carol. Yeah, it is a bit weird. Bob. Well, don't worry about it. I'll have a look later. Carol. I'd feel better if we check now, actually. Is that all right for you? Bob. Really? It's 50 bucks. Can wait. Right? Okay, so you get the difference there. I mean, speed is one, but also the addition of things like and these kind of fillers and stuff also comes into conversation. And you won't get that with audiobooks because audiobooks will be read in this sort of narrative voice, which is supposed to be very clear and kind of with an even tempo. So, you know, just something to think about, that's all. I guess the point that I'm making there is audiobooks are great for improving your comprehension or your engagement with language and your interest, but don't use them for like shadowing, for example, right? Because it's not necessarily the way that people naturally speak. What was this comment that Alexander makes? So Adrian recommends reading loudly, which is rather difficult for me. So reading out loud is something which I recommend for when you are checking your writing. So if you're writing an essay or something, a great way of checking through it is to read it out loud. I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading books out loud, actually. In fact, I think I would push against that a little bit. I think it's actually better to just sit down, relax, and read in your head. Some people even recommend not doing sub-vocalization. So sub-vocalization is when, as you read, you have like a voice in your head reading out, right? That's called sub-vocalization. Some people say don't do that even because it limits your reading speed. Personally, I think sub-vocalization is okay. It's something that I do when I read in English or other languages. And I think it's really difficult actually to stop sub-vocalization. So I think that it's not really worth the effort of going against sub-vocalization unless you're training to be a speed reader or something. That said, I think that reading out loud is something specific And it's not something that I would necessarily encourage to go with extensive reading. Although, as I've said, I do think it's useful to read your own writing out loud. You'll be surprised at how much you notice and how much you can self-correct just by reading it out loud. That's quite funny, Derek. My wife hates horror. Yeah. Yeah, loads. Loads of books. You know what you should do, Alia? Get yourself a Spotify subscription and just have a look on Spotify. You know what? Let's come back to it. Once I've finished the class, I'll have a look on Spotify and I'll find you some. You'll have to tell me what books you're interested in, and your English level, I think, is upper intermediate advanced, right? That's a guess. Because I think I heard some of your English previously. Okay, great. We can go back to the class. This is the last section. And this is important. And this is to my students who will be starting next week. If you're listening, which I know some of you are, because you do. So hello, by the way. So really think about this one. It's important. Bringing questions. When a question about English pops into your head, make a note. You should have a dedicated section of your notebook for questions about English which pop into your head. This is particularly the case for questions which you are unable to answer yourself. Now, the motivation for this is obvious. Bring them to class. Encourage your teacher to have an any English questions section of the class. Of course, this relies on having the time to do that. Some teachers might be a little bit more protective about the time to do that. But I think that most teachers will agree at least to 10 minutes of just open questions. I'm always happy to have open question sections because the thing is, when someone asks a question, we know that we've got the intrigue and the engagement and the interest and stuff like that is already going on. So questions are really good, actually. And it gives me a chance as a teacher to, at the very least, I can say, don't worry about it. But most likely I can go further and talk about it, address doubts, go on a little offshoot and talk about something, right? So Q&A it's great to have the ability to do Q&A. So what we actually need is we need a way to remember the questions that we actually have, because that's the problem. When you put someone on the spot and you say, ask me a question now about English. Huh? I don't have any. So this is why you need a way to record those questions when they pop into your head, so that when you go to your expensive English teacher, you can ask them the questions. I'm speaking to you guys. Hello, we're starting class next week. Get your questions ready. I'm always happy to answer them. So even if I answer them by saying, don't worry about it. So that's another way that you can make the most of your course. So that's all the ways today that we can make the most of our new course. I hope you've got a lot out of the lesson today. You can, of course, download the notes, as always, from the link right there, which I'm going to put right now into the chat. And in just a moment, that will be down below the video. We're into question time, folks. I've been lecturing for 1 hour and 50 minutes. I think that's a record lecture time for the channel. Normally, it's the question times which take us into this sort of territory, not just the material itself. Surprisingly, I had quite a lot to say about that issue. That was planned to be 50 minutes. We ended up going 1 hour over. But there you go. Any questions that anyone has, you can pop those in the chat. I'm going to start with giving some recommendations to Alia about audiobooks. So I'm just going to pop onto Spotify. And Alia has not answered my questions. I still wait our Zoom session. Are you talking to me? So, audiobooks on Spotify. Let's have a look here. I want to do a search. Ooh, what's this? Sherlock Holmes, the BBC Complete Collection. I have to be careful here because I don't want copyright claim. So, excuse me, I'm going to speak over it, but I'm going to just play a little bit to see what the accent's like here.
Well, I can't blame you for standing by your own wife.
Okay, so that was an American accent. Let's move on forward. By the way, am I sharing my... Oh, I am. Yeah, okay. Okay, not bothered about that.
An unknown factor in this business. Even to me? Especially to you. You try to contact me or bring me out some comfort or other. I couldn't let you take...
Oh, that's great. Okay, so we've got there a good example of... I wouldn't call it natural English because it was a bit over-dramatized. But what I did like is the speed of speech was quite authentic. That would mean that it's more towards the advanced spectrum of what we're looking at. But I think just based on that, then I could actually recommend that for British accent. So that is Sherlock Holmes, the complete BBC collection with 60 full cast dramatizations of Sherlock Holmes stories. I love Sherlock Holmes. So I'm going to just highlight that for you. That's that one, Alia. Don't let anyone tell you that the English in Sherlock Holmes is outdated. You might find the occasional piece of vocabulary that's outdated, but on the whole, if you want to learn RP and sound fantastic, then it's a great way to do it. Alia says, yes, I'm talking to you. Did we plan a Zoom session? Have you emailed me? You need to email me. Do you want a needs analysis? I do free needs analysis. But I didn't have an email from you. Or do you mean live here? You mean live, don't you? Okay. Yeah. It was the technical problems put me off. I enjoy doing it and I enjoy the error correction, but when I do it, I always have this kind of anxiety that there's going to be audio problems like echo and things like that. And it's really awkward and annoying. I think what I need to do actually is we need to do a session where I have an input session to start and then Q&A and then maybe a break and then we do the Zoom sessions. I think actually that would work better because Alexander's asking about it as well. So it's obviously something that you guys want. Okay. Okay. All right, next Saturday, we'll do it. Can I do Wednesday? Maybe I can do this Wednesday. maybe I can do this Wednesday and we can do one. But this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do an input lecture like today's class for a little bit, then a Q&A about the lesson, and then we'll have a break, about 10 minutes, and then do Zoom. There's a few reasons for that, by the way. Number one is that when someone on YouTube discovers the video, I need the first part of the video to be as kind of perfect as possible. Like if someone clicks on a video and it's 10 minutes of audio problems and echo and technical issues, then they're gone. They're not going to stay, right? So that's kind of why, that's one of the reasons why it wasn't working for me. I was getting this, I remember we had Manuel on once and there was all this echo and there was someone else on and their microphone didn't work, I don't mind dealing with those issues, but not at the start of the stream because it will kill the metrics. So that's how we'll do it. And I think that could work. So we'll try that on Wednesday. Now, while we're on the subject of Wednesday, this Wednesday will be the final Wednesday stream at that time for at least 3 months. And the reason for that is I'm teaching at that time on Wednesdays now. This is an interesting time of year for teachers. It's when we all get our schedules and we find out when we're busy and when we're not busy and so on. So I don't know when my second stream will be yet. I haven't decided. It depends on a few things, but it's probably not going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday unless I do a morning stream. Now, I'm not sure if that's of interest to people. Let's do a quick poll of the people who are here. And I think the people who are still here are the kind of very dedicated parts of our community. Most people actually start to drop off when we get to Q&A, and we just have the kind of the more dedicated learners who stay on. So I'm going to ask a quick poll to you guys, and we'll see. Consider the time that we started the stream today. Would you be interested in our stream earlier? And I'm going to say yes. Let's see, it was at 1. So it'd have to be at least probably 2 hours earlier. Yes, 2 hours earlier. Yes, 3 or more hours earlier. And no. Okay. All right, if you could all vote in that poll, that would be handy. So consider the time that we started today. We started at 1 p.m. UK. That was 2 hours ago. Would you be interested in a stream which was 2 hours earlier than that? So 11 a.m. UK or 10 a.m. UK or even earlier? 9 a.m. UK, 8 a.m. UK, 7 a.m. UK. I'm not doing a stream earlier than 7 a.m. For one, I don't think my wife would be very happy about that. Hello, everybody. It's Professor Rich at 7 a.m. So let me know what you think. Yeah, Ali, and you can find other stuff on Spotify, but that's just one example of something where you will get British accent and just great stories. They're so good, those stories. If you like detective stories, Sherlock Holmes is like the foundation. There's modern ones and they're great and whatever, but Sherlock Holmes is just, it's the foundation of detective fiction. French grammar. Rich Sleepwalker asked a question about French grammar. Where's that? Was that this? An apple of my eye. An apple of my eye. It's not an apple, it's the apple of my eye. The apple of my eye. So you can use it for things. The apple of your eye is normally it's someone who is a protege or pupil and you hold up as being kind of most important to you. But people sometimes use it, and we might traditionally say misuse it, but now because it's in common use, it's okay to say that it's just how we use it. We can use it for something that we cherish. I wouldn't use it for anything. So like this notebook is the apple of my eye. It's something that you've invested into. So maybe something you've built, like my car is my apple of my eye, is the apple of my eye, the apple of my eye. If I've kind of worked on my car, I've constructed it, I've added to it, I've modified it. Maybe I could say my computer's the apple of my eye because my computer I built myself. It's a custom PC. Do you want to see it? Can I show you it? Go on, I'll show you it. Yeah, it's cool. So I built that thing, and you might say I might say the apple of my eye for that because I built it. But it's not. I mean, I built it 2 years ago. So, I don't really spend enough time on it now to say anything like that. Probably my cats are the apple of our eyes for me and my wife at the moment. I would be wary of books which focus just on idioms. I think idioms are nice to learn in a complementary way, but I wouldn't have studied focus on idioms. I know that I have done streams on idioms in the past, but personally, I don't think I would do that. Just learn them as they come. It's like the whole meaning form thing. It's like if you're focusing on something being idiomatic, I think you're focusing too much on kind of a form perspective. Really, you want to come at it from meaning. So if we come at it from meaning, what do we think? Okay, useful phrases for a discussion in a meeting. I'm not sure I agree with that. Something else to bring up is the elephant in the room is, right? Oh, look, we have an idiom, the elephant in the room, right? So that's coming from a meaning perspective. We have a function and we're considering the functional language. And the elephant in the room happens to be an idiom which is useful in that context. So that's how I would get into it, Derek. You mentioned you study French. What good grammar books do you advise us to learn? I'm no expert in French, Carl. I can't really recommend any French learning material, actually. My wife is superior to me in French. She has heavily studied Duolingo, actually, and the songs of Edith Piaf. Is that it? Piaf? I always forget. I always get it wrong. You know, la bien rose. And what's the other one? Je ne regrette not. Everyone knows that one. Je ne regrette not. Brilliant. There's some great films you can watch, by the way, Cal, if you're learning French. You should watch The Taste of Things. Fantastic. That's a great film. Did I miss someone's question? I feel like I missed a question. I had like in my head. Yes, I did. Hector, I'm so sorry. Which sentences are correct? We drive most carefully. We drive the most carefully. We drive most carefully. We drive the most carefully. We drive the most carefully. That's wrong. Number 2 is wrong. 3, which one lasts the longest? That's okay. Which one lasts longest? That's okay. Which one lasts longer? That's okay. Which one lasts long? That's okay. The only sentence that's incorrect is number 2. And if we want to correct that, there's a few ways we can do it for number 2. We could have, we drive carefully the most. We could have, we carefully drive the most. It's a bit weird, but we can have that. Or we could have, we drive the most Wait. I sing the most happily. You know what? It's okay. We drive the most carefully. It just sounds a bit weird. Yeah. We drive most carefully. We drive the most carefully. Yeah, it's okay. They're all okay then. All of them are correct. All of them are correct. Maybe a better question for you, Hector, is which would be the most common or the most natural? And I think number 1 is more common from 1 and 2. Three and 4 are both common. 5 is also common, but it's a different question. Because with 5, it's a comparative question where you're asking between 2. And then 6 is a different question again. 6 is a relative question where you're asking which one lasts long, as in, here's 5 batteries. Which one do you want to buy? Well, which one lasts long? 3, 4, and 5. These 3 batteries all last quite long, for example. So 1 is more. 1 and 2 are both common. 3, 4, and 5 and 6 are common but have different meanings. Yes, Edith Piaf. Well, you can always go back. It's still there. Let's end the poll just to see. So 2 hours earlier, 37%. No, 37%. And 3 or more hours earlier, 25%. So just from those 16 votes, we can see that 2 hours earlier could be a possibility. So that's 11 a.m. UK. It would be interesting. I've never done a stream at that time. And I don't think many people stream at that time. So I could try that. No, 37% is definitely worth considering. Smash that like button and hit subscribe. It's been my pleasure to join you today. My name has been Professor Rich, and today we've learnt how to make the most of an English learning course. Do enjoy the rest of your week, the rest of your weekend, certainly, the rest of your Saturday, the rest of your weekend. And I will probably see you on Wednesday. That will be the last class on Wednesday that we have for a while. After that, I'll see you next Saturday. And for one of those classes, we will have some live IELTS Zoom practice in the format that I spoke about earlier. Enjoy yourselves, everybody. It's been my pleasure. And I'll catch you next time.